Did you know that the richest man in the world was once beaten so badly at school that he had to be taken to the hospital? Elon Musk, the genius behind Tesla and SpaceX, had a childhood so traumatic it almost completely broke him. But what happened after this horrible experience not only changed his life, it literally changed the course of human history. If you want to understand what truly shaped this extraordinary man, get ready for a story that will shock you. Because the truth about Elon Musk's childhood is much darker than anything you've ever heard before. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to the channel, because we're going to reveal the deepest secrets of Elon's life that mainstream media never talks about. To fully understand the hell that was Elon Musk's childhood, we need to go back to South Africa in the 1980s. Elon was born in Pretoria in 1971, during the apartheid regime, a time when the country was drowning in racial tensions and social violence. But what many people don't know is that Elon wasn't just an ordinary child trying to survive in a hostile environment. He was different in a way that made him the perfect target for predators. From a very young age, Elon showed clear signs of what we now recognize as Asperger's syndrome. He was obsessive, socially awkward, and had a very unique way of processing the world around him. While other kids played outside, Elon would spend hours reading entire encyclopedias, memorizing facts about rockets and computers. This neurological difference, which later became his greatest strength, was, in childhood, his curse. At Waterkloof House Preparatory School, where Elon studied, the environment was brutal. Any sign of weakness or difference was immediately exploited by other students. And Elon, with his strange interests and natural struggles in social interactions, became the perfect target. He was thin, awkward, and spoke in a way his classmates considered weird. But what truly sealed his fate was his refusal to conform to social expectations. While other boys were interested in sports and typical games, Elon would obsessively talk about space exploration and technology. For the school bullies, that was like painting a giant target on his back. The bullying Elon endured wasn't just verbal teasing or social exclusion. It was a systematic campaign of physical and psychological terror that lasted for years. Every single day, Elon went to school knowing he was going to be tortured. The bullies had developed specific methods to torment him. They pushed him down staircases, threw his lunch on the ground, and locked him inside closets for hours. But the worst was yet to come. The main group of bullies was led by a boy we'll call the leader, because to this day, Elon refuses to publicly name his tormentors. This boy had gathered a group of followers who saw Elon's torture as their daily form of entertainment. They created a system where different boys would take turns tormenting Elon at different parts of the school day. During morning recess, one group cornered him in the bathroom. At lunchtime, another group made sure he couldn't eat in peace. And at the end of the day, when he tried to go home, more torture was waiting for him. The psychological trauma was just as intense as the physical pain. The bullies discovered that Elon had a photographic memory, and they began using that against him. They forced him to replay his own humiliations, taunting him to remember every detail of every beating. They would say things like, "You'll remember this forever," as they hurt him. And they were right. Decades later, Elon can still recall, with chilling precision, each incident of bullying he endured. But perhaps the cruelest part of it all was the complete indifference of the adults. Teachers and school staff saw what was happening but turned a blind eye. In South African culture at the time, it was often believed that this kind of toughening up was necessary to turn boys into men. Elon tried many times to seek help, but the answer was always the same: learn to defend yourself, or this will pass. This betrayal by the very adults who were supposed to protect him left scars far deeper than the beatings themselves. Then came the day that would change everything. Elon was about 10 years old when the most brutal incident of his school years occurred. It was a normal Friday afternoon, and he was trying to leave school quickly to avoid the bullies, as he did every day. But this time, they were waiting for him. The group of bullies had planned something special to end the week. They cornered him on the school's main staircase, a place they knew no one would interrupt. What began as shoving and taunts quickly escalated into something far darker. The leader of the group gave a chilling order: "Let's teach him a lesson he'll never forget." And that's exactly what they did. Several boys took turns beating Elon. They threw him down the stairs with such force that he tumbled across multiple steps before coming to a stop. But that was only the beginning. When Elon tried to get up, dazed and bleeding, they rushed down and continued the assault on the ground. Kicks to his ribs, his head, his stomach. Elon tried to shield himself, curling into a fetal position, but that only enraged them further. The most traumatic moment came when the leader grabbed Elon's head and began smashing his face against the concrete steps. Once. Twice.
3 times.
Elon briefly lost consciousness, but the attacks didn't stop. Other students walked by and simply watched. Some even laughed. No one stepped in. By the time they finally stopped, Elon was unrecognizable. His face was completely disfigured, covered in blood. His nose was broken, deep cuts surrounded his eyes, and he could barely breathe from the kicks to his chest. But perhaps the worst blow wasn't physical, it was humiliation. They had ripped off his clothes, urinated on his belongings, and left him naked and bleeding on the school floor. It was another student, arriving later, who found Elon unconscious and finally called for help. When paramedics arrived, they initially thought he had been in a car accident. That's how severe his injuries were. Elon was rushed to the hospital, where he spent 3 days recovering from the physical wounds. But the emotional scars would last far, far longer. When Musk, Elon's mother, arrived at the hospital and saw the state her son was in, she completely broke down. She later admitted that she couldn't even recognize her own child. He was so disfigured. The broken nose, the swollen blackened eyes, the split lips. Elon looked like the victim of a car crash, not a 10-year-old boy who had simply gone to school that morning. But the most fascinating reaction came from Elon himself. Lying in that hospital bed, something fundamental shifted in his mind. Decades later, he would describe this moment as his awakening. It was then that he realized 3 fundamental truths that would shape the rest of his life. First, the world is a brutal and unfair place, and no one will save you but yourself. Second, being different in a conformist society is a sentence to suffering, unless you are strong enough to turn that difference into power. Third, the only way to ensure he would never be a victim again was to become so powerful that no one would ever dare attack him. These realizations, born out of the deepest pain a child can experience, became the pillars of Elon Musk's personality. His obsessive need for control, his refusal to accept limitations, his almost inhuman determination to achieve the impossible, all of it can be traced back to that moment in the hospital, when a brutally beaten child decided he would never be weak again. But there was something more. During those days of recovery, Elon began to fantasize about a world where people like him didn't just survive, they thrived. He imagined a society where intelligence and innovation were valued more than brute strength and social conformity. And more importantly, he began to plan how he would get there. What happened in Elon's mind during his recovery was a psychological transformation rarely seen in human history. He didn't just survive the trauma, he turned it into fuel for an ambition that would change the world. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, but in Elon's case, it was something far deeper and more systematic. First, he developed what can only be described as an obsession with knowledge as a form of power. If physical strength had failed to protect him, then he would become so intellectually powerful that he would be untouchable. Elon began devouring books at an alarming rate, reading up to 10 hours a day. This wasn't casual reading. He memorized entire encyclopedias, studied technical manuals intended for adults, and absorbed information with an intensity that even worried his own mother. But there was something darker behind this hunger for knowledge. Elon had realized that the world rewards those who can provide what others cannot. If he became indispensable through his unique skills and knowledge, then no one could reject him or attack him without losing something valuable. It was a survival strategy disguised as genius. The second change was even more fundamental. Elon developed a compulsive need to always be several steps ahead of everyone around him. He began studying not just what was, but what could be. While other children his age played games, Elon spent hours imagining what the future might look like, and what role he could play in shaping it. This wasn't normal childhood curiosity. It was the strategic planning of someone who had learned that the world is a battlefield, and only visionaries survive. The third transformation may have been the most important of all. Elon developed a completely different relationship with failure and pain. Most people who suffer severe childhood trauma build lives of safety and predictability to avoid ever feeling vulnerable again. Elon did the opposite. He became addicted to risk and the possibility of failure, because he had discovered that only by confronting his greatest fears could he transcend them. It was during this time that the first true signs of Elon's genius began to emerge, though few recognized it at the time. At just 12 years old, only 2 years after the brutal incident that landed him in a hospital, Elon created and sold his first video game, called Blaster, for $500. But what's truly remarkable about this achievement isn't the money he earned, it's the mental process behind it. Elon didn't just learn programming, he mastered it at a speed that left experienced adults stunned. But more importantly, he displayed an instinctive understanding of how to transform ideas into marketable products. That's not a skill you can teach, it's something that emerges from a deep intuitive grasp of how the world really works. The game itself was relatively simple, but it already carried the hallmarks that would define all of Elon's future projects. Technical ambition that pushed beyond what seemed possible, obsessive focus on detail, and a clear vision of how innovation could be used to conquer existing markets. Even at 12, Elon wasn't just creating a product, he was studying how to revolutionize entire industries. But something even deeper was happening. For Elon, creating this game wasn't about money or recognition, it was about proving to himself that he could build something out of nothing. Every line of code was a declaration, I am no longer the helpless victim you once beat down. Every function that worked flawlessly was proof that his mind, the very thing the bullies had tried to break, was not only intact, but growing more powerful with each passing day. As Elon grew older, he began to develop what can only be described as an elaborate escape strategy. Not just a physical escape from South Africa, but an escape from an entire system of limitations that had tried to destroy him. And this strategy revealed a sophistication of thought that was extraordinary for someone so young. First, Elon realized that he would have to leave South Africa if he ever wanted a real chance at success. But he also understood that this escape needed to be permanent and irreversible. He didn't just want to visit other countries. He wanted to completely reinvent himself in a culture that valued the very qualities that had made his childhood a living hell. He meticulously researched different countries, studying their cultures, economies, and opportunities. And he chose America not by chance, but because he had identified it as the one place in the world where his unique combination of ambition, technical intelligence, and willingness to take extreme risks would not only be tolerated, but rewarded. The second part of his strategy was even more impressive. Elon decided that he would not simply escape his current situation, he would become so successful that he would rewrite the rules of the game for people like him. This wasn't teenage fantasy, it was long-term strategic planning. He began studying entrepreneurs who had transformed entire industries, analyzing not just what they did, but how they thought about problems that others considered impossible to solve. And then came the boldest decision of all. At 17, Elon resolved to leave South Africa forever, even if it meant cutting ties with his family and starting completely from scratch in a foreign country. For most teenagers, that would have been a terrifying idea. For Elon, it was the only logical option. At the age of 10, he had learned that the world would not spare him for being young or vulnerable. Now, at 17, he was ready to turn that hardness against the world itself. What makes Elon Musk's story truly extraordinary isn't just that he survived the trauma, it's how he systematically turned every aspect of that harrowing experience into a competitive advantage. And when you look at his adult achievements through this lens, fascinating patterns emerge. Elon's obsession with colonizing Mars, for example, isn't just about space exploration. It's about creating a backup world where people like him, who don't fit traditional social norms, can not only survive but thrive. Every time he talks about making humanity a multiplanetary species, he is essentially saying, we will never again let a single culture or environment determine who can succeed. The way he runs his companies also directly reflects his childhood experiences. Elon is famous for working 100+ hours a week and expecting the same level of dedication from his employees. Critics call it toxic behavior, but to Elon, it's simply realism. He learned at age 10 that the world doesn't offer second chances to those unwilling to give everything. This extreme work ethic isn't cruelty, it's what he genuinely believes is necessary to win in a brutal world. Even his controversial presence on social media can be traced back to his childhood trauma. When Elon posts provocative tweets or engages in public debates, he's doing something the 10-year-old boy who was beaten could never do, fighting back. Every bold tweet is a declaration, you can no longer silence me. You can no longer control me. But perhaps the most important aspect of Elon's transformation is what it teaches us about human potential. Most of us assume that severe childhood trauma inevitably creates dysfunctional adults. Elon's case proves that this doesn't have to be true, but only under very specific conditions. First, Elon had the advantage of exceptional intelligence, which allowed him to process and recontextualize his trauma in ways most people could not. His ability to see patterns and connections that others miss applied both to his psychological development and his business ventures. Second, he had access to resources, books, computers, and eventually educational opportunities, that enabled him to channel his pain into productive learning. Many victims of bullying do not have these options available. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Elon made a conscious decision to use his anger as fuel rather than let it consume him. This is not a choice every trauma survivor can make, and it's important to recognize that not all traumas can be transformed into advantage in the way Elon managed to do. But for those who can follow a similar path, Elon's story offers a powerful model. It shows that it is possible to take the most painful experiences of our lives and transform them into the foundation for our greatest successes. So the next time you hear about Elon Musk launching rockets into space, revolutionizing the automotive industry, or making controversial statements that capture the world's attention, remember where it all began. Remember a 10-year-old boy, bleeding on the floor of a school in South Africa, making the decision that would define the rest of his life. He would never be a victim again. That child didn't know at the time that he would become the richest man in the world. He didn't know that his companies would fundamentally change the way we think about transportation, energy, and space exploration. All he knew was that the pain he was feeling in that moment had to mean something. It had to be transformed into something greater. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson of Elon Musk's story. It's not that trauma is good or necessary for success, it never is. But when we face our deepest pain with courage and determination, we can discover reserves of strength we didn't even know existed. We can turn our darkest moments into the foundation of our greatest light. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we will continue exploring the secrets behind the most extraordinary minds of our time. And remember, sometimes, our greatest traumas are just the universe preparing us for our greatest triumphs.